Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Matt Williams. I'm a tutor in politics and what is known as the Access Fellow here at Jesus College at the University of Oxford. Now, I'm often asked, how do you choose students to be admitted to the University of Oxford? Well, I've been involved with admissions at Oxford University for about 13 years, and so I know quite a lot about how we decide between individual students. And I'm just going to spill it all here now, because why not? I mean, the reason specifically why is because there's a lot of anxiety amongst prospective students to Oxford as to know what they should do, how they could be more competitive, what they should prioritise in terms of their time management when it comes to preparing an application. And all of this sort of stuff I think ought to be more publicly known so that more people can make competitive applications. One of the consequences of the anxiety of not knowing is that some people don't apply at all. And that is my sort of main message. If you are eligible for a degree at a university like Oxford and you would like to apply, my strong advice is go for it. Don't be put off by the fear of failure, because I'm afraid, like it or not, getting knocked back for things, getting rejected for things is just a part of life. It's a part of growing. It's not something to be scared of. It's absolutely not something to be ashamed of. Very few people will make it to some point in their life that they would consider to be a success without having a few knockbacks along the way. I applied to Cambridge when I was 17 and I didn't get in, and it's done me nothing but good. I have no resentment, I have no bitterness. It was a very important moment in my life, which I actually genuinely, without any irony, cherish. Promise. Okay. There's only one heavyweight champion boxer in the world who's ever won the title without ever losing a fight along the path towards that, or at least not a professional fight, and that's a man called Evander Holyfield. Now, his story is so exceptionally unusual that it's the exception that proves the rule. The rule is that you have to stretch yourself, you have to put yourself out there, you have to occasionally fail, and that's okay. Failure is just a part of the equation of success. And the only way you can guarantee not getting into a university like Oxford is not applying at all. So don't allow fear to be the thing that puts you off. But nonetheless, there's some reasonable anxiety and uncertainty as to what universities are looking for, how they judge between different applicants, often very, very good applicants, and how they decide ultimately who to choose and who to say thank you, but not today. So let's start at the beginning. I mean, fairly obviously you have to meet the entry requirements. And these are all listed on the Oxford University website, and you'll find something similar for all other competitive universities in the UK. And what you need for Oxford are 3 good A-levels, okay? And so that would be something like 3 A's for law, but it would be 3 B's if you were studying law with the foundation year in law, which is a new degree, and you should check out if you're eligible for that. And it would be A-star AA for geography and medicine and for some other subjects. For none of our degrees do you have to have more than 3 A-levels, and indeed for none of our degrees would you obtain a competitive advantage if you had more than 3 A-levels. You can certainly do more than 3 A-levels if you wish, but don't do it because you think that's what Oxford really wants. We want what we say on the website. There's no subtext. We want 3 good A-levels, and that's what you need. You also do not need to have perfect results. You don't need to have 3 A-stars. You don't need to have 4 A-stars, obviously, or 5 A-stars at A-level. You also don't need to have perfect, flawless GCSE results or any other middle school results that you might have from anywhere else in the world. It's true that Oxford applicants tend to have good grades. It's not true that they all have perfect grades. I'm not even sure what perfect grades would even mean in a sort of philosophical sense, but we are definitely not looking for someone who has a flawless academic track record, because if we were, we'd be missing out on a lot of incredibly talented people. And herein lies one of the first points of confusion for many applicants. They will often know about or think about a sort of an individual candidate who was flawless academically, who did have, as far as they could see, an impeccable track record of nothing but straight A-stars throughout school, and then they apply and then they don't get offered a place at Oxford. And this causes sort of extreme doubt in a lot of applicants' mind, because they just think, well, what is the university looking for? What do they actually want? And grades do matter. Grades are particularly important for us to assess whether or not someone will actually enjoy the course and will have the sufficient skills and knowledge and understanding to get through the rigors of the work that we require of them. But grades are just one element. They're one data point. And we spend about 20 person hours at Oxford on every application. So we are taking a lot of care and attention. And if we were just using school grades, then we could take a lot less time and we could do things a lot more quickly. But grades, whilst they are useful to give us some idea of how well someone would cope on course, We're looking for people that will be the most independent-minded, most creative thinkers. And whilst school grades can give us a little bit of data around that, they are by no means the only thing. And so this is a really important point. Yes, you need to have good grades. No, you do not need to have perfect grades. And we are looking for other things that can give us better data on, in particular, your academic potential. And academic potential has more to do with things like creativity, fluid intelligence, problem solving, and critical evaluation. And those sorts of things are roughly tested by A-levels, but are better tested by things like admissions tests, which we use for many, but not all of our subjects, and interviews. And I'll go into more detail on those a bit later. But the upshot of this is that if you meet the entry requirements, even if you only just meet them, you should totally apply if you want to. There is no need to exceed the entry requirements and consider yourself a viable applicant. There is no particular tariff or expectation for GCSEs. So even if your GCSEs are a mixed bag, indeed perhaps if some of your GCSEs weren't very strong at all, that again should not rule out an application for you, okay? We would take your application very seriously, and we have many fantastic, utterly cherished students here who didn't get any of the top marks in GCSEs, okay? Because sometimes life gets in the way at GCSE. Sometimes we have to take into consideration what's called context, so it could be personal, social, or educational disadvantages that that person faced. But partly it's also because school grades just are not the best predictor of someone's academic potential. They tell us an awful lot, obviously, about someone's academic abilities, but even there, they're slightly flawed because a lot of it will depend on where someone was schooled and various other aspects to do with their life. So we're looking for much more besides, okay? So that's why grades are important, but they're not the be-all and end-all, okay? You certainly don't need to have any other connections to the university, so what's called legacy in the United States of America, where a family member had attended Oxford, for example. It won't help you in the slightest, and it certainly won't hinder you if you're the first person in your family to go to university, or you're the first person in your family to go to Oxford. Some universities in America do look for legacy. I personally think that's bonkers and completely wrong. We don't do that at Oxford, thankfully. You certainly do not need money either. If there are parts of the application process that do involve fees, then we can help you with that. And whether or not you have no money at all or you're fantastically wealthy will have no bearing on our admissions process whatsoever. You can't buy preferment is perhaps the most important point to raise there. Okay, so what's next? Is there a type of person that universities look for? Is there a sort of Oxbridge material? Well, I've covered this in a recent video, and I said quite adamantly there is definitely not. I mean, there are some generalizations about the people that attend universities like Oxford. They are ever so slightly richer than the average person in Britain. They are more likely to have attended a private fee-paying school, although only 30% of Oxford students did attend a fee-paying school and 70% did not. So although Oxford is not perfectly representative of the UK, it is not bad, and it's getting better all the time. So no, there isn't a certain type we're looking for, and we certainly don't sort of prioritize people that look a certain way, sound a certain way, act a certain way. There's not a sociological sort of imprint and idea of an Oxford student that we are looking for. And Oxford students, we've got 24,000 of them, are highly diverse. They're from all over the world, 140 countries represented. 25% of our undergraduates are BAME, 31% of our postgraduates are as well. So there's a lot of diversity in Oxford. And so there's not a type. We're not looking for a certain person that looks a certain way. I think there probably is an attitudinal type. I think if you were to sort of put a gun to my head, proverbially, and ask me, what do Oxford students have in common? Tell me what it takes. I would say that Oxford students are very diligent, they're very passionate, they're very curious, they're basically pretty intellectually stubborn. They want to find answers to mind-bending questions, and they're not satisfied with being fobbed off by lack of answers. So that's what Oxford students tend to have in common. So why are there more women than men at Oxford? Women are overrepresented marginally as a proportion of the British population. About 54–55% of our undergraduates now are women. So why are men underrepresented at Oxford? Well, I mean, there's various theories around this, one of which has to do with maturity. Men tend to mature a little bit later intellectually than women. But women are also in school showing much greater diligence, much greater perseverance on average than many young men. So that's part of the point, is that we're not looking for a type and we're not discriminating in favour of women, but women are showing that attitudinal type that we look for, that perseverance, that curiosity, that resilience, that desire to just keep hunting for answers to interesting questions. Why are there not more working class people? Well, again, Oxford does represent working class people much better than is typically thought. We have a lot of students from working class backgrounds, and indeed we have lots of people who are from household poverty. But it's true to say that working class people are not proportionately represented at the University of Oxford, and that's something that we are working to improve. Why are there not more? I mean, the primary reason is that working class people don't apply in sufficient numbers, and so that's why we need to do much more outreach work to try and improve those application numbers. But the reasons for them not applying would include these notions from the past that Oxford is somewhere where you have to have had perfect grades throughout school, and when you do arrive it'll be full of snobs that won't think much of you. And both of those things are untrue, and so that's why we need to spread more information, such as I'm attempting to do with this video. Another reason why working class people tend to be underrepresented is that when they do apply to Oxford, they apply for our more competitive degrees, such as law, economics and management, computer science, medicine, and so on. Now, that's not a problem. Obviously, that's great. That's to be encouraged. But people from privately educated backgrounds are more likely to be aware of the wider range of subjects that are available, and also the slightly sort of easier odds of getting in for some of the other degrees. Now, that's not to say that everyone should act strategically in that way necessarily, but just be aware that there are lots of options available and there are no bad options at Oxford. If you have a degree from Oxford, then you will have a fruitful career in all sorts of sectors of the economy, in all likelihood. Okay, so there's definitely not a type of person. There are some generalizations we can make about Oxford students, but they tend to be more attitudinal than sociological. I mean, one thing that I'm often asked is, well, do you positively discriminate? Do you do what's called affirmative action in the United States of America? And the answer is an adamant no. It would be totally illegal if we did. It would be against the Equality Act of 2010. And if there was any sort of sense that we were acting in such a way, then people could bring a lawsuit against us and would win. But no one has successfully done so. And I'm very confident that that is not the basis of our application process. So in other words, we would not look at a person of colour, let's say, and give them priority simply because of their skin colour in order to achieve some sort of racial quota. That does not happen at all. What we do take into consideration are reasonably justifiable economic and social data points which give us some indications about relative disadvantage. And that is nothing to do with someone's skin colour, but it might, for example, have something to do with if that person is eligible for free school meals, or if they've come out of local authority care, or if they have a disability. What we do is that if we have, let's say, two candidates that are very similar academically, they've performed similarly well on admissions tests and interviews, but one person comes from a more disadvantaged background than the other, then all things being equal, that person from the more disadvantaged background has greater academic potential because they have attained the same or very similar level despite a more difficult and challenging background. So that's how we do utilise context and disadvantage. What we don't do is look for people to tick boxes on our behalf. Okay, so there we go, that's the university type. Now, what are we interested in beyond good school grades? Well, we're looking for people that care, that they're passionate. Basically, we're looking for geeks. Now, I am a geek. I am very proud to call myself a geek. I think it's one of those words that should be reclaimed because it shouldn't be a term of abuse. A geek is basically someone who cares about the world and the universe. They're endlessly curious. They think that learning stuff is cool because it means you can solve people's problems. And it is cool. And, you know, I don't think anyone should be ashamed of that, right? So what universities want is to be interested in what you want. They want to know that you have some passions, you have some interests, some pet projects, you're curious. They want to know that you're a self-starter. Because what happens when you arrive at university is that you have to craft a lot of your own curriculum, your own syllabus. Yes, there'll be some structured components. Yes, you'll have to attend certain lectures and you'll have to read certain books and so on. But there will also be a huge amount at the margins that will be up to you and for you to determine. And we want to get a sense that you're up for that you know what you're getting yourself in for, and that you have some passion. So it's a good idea to become a bit of a mini expert in something that you care about. And it shouldn't be something that you were told to care about, but something that you do authentically care about, right? So is your passion found or made? So do you have to sort of go around hunting and waiting for inspiration to hit you on the forehead, or can you sort of construct a passion? It's kind of both. And what I would suggest is if you're not sure what you're passionate about, you need to go and explore. Imagine you're back in the sandbox at primary school and you're rooting around in the sand and you're discovering things and you're working out what you're interested in. You kind of need to do the same. You need to just sort of go around looking at things, listening to things, watching things, and working out what grabs you. Effectively, what will happen in a physiological sense is that when you find something really interesting, you'll get a little woo tingle of dopamine. And that dopamine is a reward for your perseverance. And it's a reward that's hard baked into many species in the animal kingdom, okay? But we human beings can find dopamine from academic pursuits, which is pretty cool. So when you find that sort of slight thrill of, oh, I've just learned something that absolutely changed my mind and completely reoriented the universe for me, follow that. Follow the dopamine and see where it takes you, because that is passion. Okay, and there are various ways that you can do this, but effectively what you should aim for is to pretend to be an undergraduate student before you are an undergraduate student. So that's what we would call super curricular experiences. This is where you go around and you read things, you watch things, you try puzzles, you stretch yourself and challenge yourself. And if you're doing the sorts of things that undergraduate students do in the course that you're interested in, then you know it's at the right level. So I've put quite a few lectures on YouTube, and there are lectures from other universities that will be exactly the sort of level that you should be thinking about. So go and watch those as a starting point. There is Project Gutenberg, which has got oodles of free ebooks, so you can go and read some of the classics totally for free and see which you fancy. There's Oxplore, which is a fantastic website, the home of big questions. There are podcasts, of course, that come from universities. Again, exactly the sort of things that university students would read. You could have some work experiences, although I should note that having a work experience will not give you a comparative advantage in admissions to Oxford, so don't worry if you can't get any work experience, but it is a really good way of finding out how the theories that you've read in books actually play out in the real world. There's also competitions like the bioinformatics organisation's competition, which is for computer science. Then you can enter those and really develop your skills fantastically there. And of course you can just go into the real world. So I've got a Crown Court here, the Old Bailey. If you're planning to become a law student, you can do worse than to actually attend a court and go and sit in the public gallery and watch what happens there. Okay, so go and find your passion, make your passion, it's kind of a bit of both, all right? And think about your personality. Part of your personality is how you think, so it's a good idea to indulge in a bit of metacognition, which is thinking about your thinking, sort of reflecting on how you think and how you can tune that up a bit. As anyone who's watched any of my other videos will now be predicting, I'm going to tell you to think more like a child, because that's literally how I teach Oxford students to think. In other words, to think like you don't know anything and to be full of questions and ask things rather than leading with knowledge. Because we're not looking for know-it-alls at Oxford or similar universities, we're looking for think-it-alls, people that can unpack complicated puzzles and come up with interesting answers. And children are so good at this. They're so good at just asking the right questions because they're not worried about what they're supposed to know. They just try and come up with some interesting thoughts. So for example, a past Oxford interview question for medicine was, we have 2 kidneys but only 1 heart. Why is that? Now, a good way to start that interview would be to just suggest all of the things you know about the heart and the kidneys and how they might work, and that would be fine to start with. But to get to the higher levels, you need to start thinking like a child. You need to start thinking along the lines of, do we have 1 heart? Now that might sound like a slightly bonkers question to ask. It's a very sort of childlike question in its innocence, if you like, in its sort of naivety. But actually, it reveals a fantastic point, which is that the heart is made up of 4 chambers and multiple pipes and veins and nerves and all sorts of other things. So do we in fact have 1 heart? Calling it 1 heart is probably just something that's been constructed through human language and through counting. It doesn't actually represent the organ terribly well. So maybe we shouldn't say that we've got 1 heart and 2 kidneys. We should say we've got a circulatory system and a renal system. Maybe we should think about it more systemically rather than counting off individual organs. Or perhaps at the very least we should say we've got a 4-chambered pumping thing, but it's not even one thing, it's 4 things sort of working relatively simultaneously. So that's the way a child would think, because a child wouldn't just sort of say, oh, have we got one heart? Why would you say it's got one? It's got loads of bits, right? So that's what I mean. Thinking more like a child will help you think for yourself, because then all of a sudden you're not just trying to work out, what have I been told? What's the key fact? What did my teacher tell me? What was written in the textbook? You're actually just approaching the material for yourself. You're thinking about it for yourself, okay? And so that can be tremendously helpful. Next up, in terms of getting yourself university ready, as mentioned, it's a good idea to pretend to be an undergraduate effectively. And some of the things that will help you get to the level of an undergraduate include preparing for admissions tests and interviews. And that's part of the reason why we use admissions tests, because they are stretching, they are challenging, and they help develop your thinking skills. Okay, and I've made quite a few videos on some of the most popular admissions tests for Oxford, so go and check those out on the channel if you haven't already. But the general sort of point is that you need to have a plan, right? There is no test that has ever been devised by human beings that can't be practiced. Okay, and these admissions tests are certainly tests that you can practice. You can't revise for many of them. In other words, there's not sort of facts that you need to recall accurately, because as mentioned, we're not looking for know-it-alls, we're looking for think-it-alls. But you can always practice the types of questions that come up, you can practice the timing, and so you need to have a plan as to how you're going to do that. And little and often is the way to beat this. So 15-20 minutes a day. Imagine you're, after a long busy day of other work, you are going to do a crossword or a Sudoku. It's like that. Instead of doing a crossword or a Sudoku, you're just going to do a few admissions test questions, and it'll build your skills. So it's nothing that you should resent. You should enjoy it. You should make it as fun as possible. And you should think about this of not along the lines of, well, if I pour loads of time and energy into this and I don't get in, it'll all have been wasted. No, you will have developed extraordinary skills and capabilities along the way, and it's well worth your while, okay? So that's to do with the aptitude. Now, what about your actual resilience? Now, as mentioned, the attitudinal type of an Oxford or Cambridge student tends to be someone who perseveres, who's got resilience, who's got grit, who's got a bit of stubbornness, perhaps a bit of, sense of, I'm just got to find out some answers to this, and they won't let go, okay? And also just getting through the admissions process requires a degree of resilience and endurance. And so I don't think it's mad to look on the approach to applying to competitive universities as like running a marathon. And if you were a marathon runner, you would think very carefully about your bodily health and fitness. You would think about how much sleep you're getting, you would think about the food you're eating, you would think about how well hydrated you are. And you should do the same, honestly do the same if you're applying to a university like Oxford or Cambridge. Because let's take the admissions tests as an example. Typically we chunk the applicants on the admissions tests into quartiles, so top 25%, second 25%, and so on. And the top 25%, the top quartile, will be very likely to be interviewed and also have a good chance of getting admitted. And anything below the top 25% have a significantly reduced chance of being admitted. It's definitely not impossible, but it's significantly reduced. Now, the difference between getting in the top quartile and the second quartile will come down to a fraction of 1 percentage point usually, because there are lots of test takers and the margins of difference are absolutely razor thin. So to make sure that you're on the right side of that margin, it could come down to how well rested you are, how fresh you're feeling, how sort of physiologically prepared you are. Is your brain healthy enough to do that sort of work? And that means that you need to eat well, because your brain is only 3% of your body mass, but it consumes about 1/5 to 1/4 of your daily calories. And it needs things like vitamins in order to work well. And it certainly needs to be hydrated, because 80% of your brain is water. So thinking about how well rested you are, how well fed you are, how well watered you are, is absolutely relevant to your calculations. And it could make the difference between being competitive and not being competitive. Okay? And this sort of relates to not only the health of your body, but also the health of your mind and the extension of your mind. Where is your head at, euphemistically? Your mind is extendable beyond your body. You know this because you've got notes perhaps on a notepad or on your phone or what have you, and that is your mind. Those are your memories, right? So your mind is not just locked inside your skull, it's extendable beyond your body. And so you've got to think about how you curate that extra bodily mind. Right? This is basically to do with how do you make notes. And the most important thing to prioritize in that is you, your personality, your interests, okay? Because the four most common words at university will be, what do you think?
Here's what I found.
Oh, Siri's interested. So by writing notes that go along the lines of, this reminds me of X, or I would add Y, or I'm not convinced of the link between A and B, that can really help elevate your notes from just recording facts to recording thoughts. And remember, we're looking for think-it-alls, not know-it-alls. It's also a good idea to practice memory techniques, because people with heightened memories will be better at recalling useful information and how they processed it. Having a good memory is nothing to do with fate, it's to do with just choice and whether or not you're willing to learn that skill. So if you want it, learn it, basically. Now finally, do universities look for geniuses? Do we look for people that don't even need to be taught, that will teach us, that will change our worlds as tutors, rather than us having to do anything? We won't have to lift a finger because this person's a frickin' genius and it'll be nice and easy. We won't have to do any work. No. I mean, so far as genius even exists, I mean, it's a highly contestable term, it's very difficult to pin down. We're not looking for people that are child prodigies, that are sort of highly advanced for their years or anything like that. And, you know, we are looking for people that are dogged and determined and resilient and curious. And actually, most geniuses that have existed have demonstrated those capabilities. They weren't gifted in the sense that they were sort of magically anointed with supernatural powers, and nor were they genetically gifted, because there's not a huge amount of evidence for how genes could even possibly play a role in, for example, Einstein's ability to do mathematics. Why, for example, would human beings have selected a gene for mathematical ability? There, of course, could be some genetic component, but the research tends to suggest it plays a far smaller role in someone's academic success than other factors, including their social environment, including the supportive framework that they were working within, but in particular, just how hard someone was willing to work. Now, the images on the screen above me are Einstein's brain, and he's a case in point, right? He didn't show particularly sort of promising childhood capabilities. He was certainly bright and committed as a child. He wasn't just this layabout who dropped out of school, as the legend would often pretend us to believe. So he was good at school, but he wasn't top of the class. But what he was just incredibly curious and hardworking. And the shaded part of his brain is called an omega fold, which is actually an extra bit of brain that he grew as a consequence of playing the violin so much. And because he used his left hand to work the strings, the right side of his brain developed this omega fold, because the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. So Einstein grew bits of brain because of his own love of violin and his passion. And that provides a lesson for all of us. If you want to be better at something, if you want to be more skillful, don't worry about whether or not you think you're gifted. You are gifted by dint of you being a human being, right? Your species means you're gifted academically already. Your default settings, your factory settings, are incredibly intellectually capable. What we tend to think of is that there are some people that are especially gifted academically. But actually, no. What is more often the case is that those people that seem to be gifted are just more hardworking. They tend to persevere more. They're more determined, they're more resilient, and they've practiced for more hours. And so you can catch up. Anyone can catch up if they just put in the effort. And the effort will come if you care, if you do something that you care about. Oxford is not a place of no joy. We don't chain ourselves to desks and read books until blood comes out of our eyes and we cry ourselves to sleep, right? This is a place of wonder, of love, of commitment, of curiosity, of just endless elation and joy, honestly. And so find your passion. Do something you care about. Don't just read things because people have told you to read them. Read them because you want to read them, and tell us what you thought about them, okay? That's the difference between someone who presents decent grades and does quite well in the admissions tests to someone that is truly credible as an undergraduate, someone who really just gets what it will be like studying at university, because that person is independent-minded, they're self-starting, they're committed, they're devoted, they're passionate. So those are all things that we highly value at universities like Oxford. So that, broadly speaking, is it. I hope that's been helpful. We look for people that meet our entry requirements, who are very passionate, who have tried out being an undergraduate, and who basically have the same sort of intellectual curiosity and a big dollop of stubbornness like we do at universities like Oxford, who basically want to help us solve these big problems of the world and the universe. They don't just want to stand by and watch and let other people tell them what they should know. They want to get their sleeves rolled up and dive in. That's what we're looking for. If after watching this you're still in some doubt or confusion, that's absolutely fine. Probably didn't do a great job at explaining it, but do please let me know in the comments any questions you have. I will get around to asking all questions as far as I'm able to do so, and it's my job to help, and I'm very happy to help, and so do please let me know what I can do. Anyway, I really look forward to helping you get into the university of your dreams, and yeah, I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. All the best. Bye now.